everyone, welcome back to my kitchen. I am, as always, really excited to have you guys here. Tonight we are making pork chop marsala. Now, marsala sauce was a request from one of you. Thank you, Julie, for giving such a great request. And I got really excited to make it for you because I feel like a lot of people get overwhelmed and a little intimidated by these really full flavor sauces like marsala or franchise or fettuccine because they have such bold flavors and we always find them in the restaurant. But they're actually really easy to make. And I know that after tonight's episode, you guys are gonna feel real confident to make it too. So tonight we are making pork chop marsala. And the great thing about marsala is you can use really any kind of meat. Pork, veal, and chicken are the most common that you're going to find. But if you really wanted to go a little crazy, maybe use a little steak, you absolutely could. If you really wanted to, you could substitute fish, but it's not a very common flavor pairing, but I do have a very long-standing belief that if you like two things, you can eat them together. So if you like salmon and you like marsala sauce, there's really no reason why you can't do it together. So tonight we are, like I said, gonna make some pork chop marsala. So we're gonna get started. So what I have here are 4 bone-out pork chops, and we still have a nice little piece of fat along the edge. Now, if you watched when we made any of our Tuscan chicken, that fat from the chicken thighs, from the chicken skin, is what helped really flavor our sauce, and it's going to be the same thing with these pork chops as well. So with marsala, it is very typical to have a little bit of a flour crust on your meat. So you don't have to do this if you're trying to be very paleo, if you're trying to cut out as many flours as you can. You don't have to do it, but it's gonna give the meat a really nice crust to it that it's just gonna miss if you don't have it. So I think that if you're gonna make the marsala sauce, you might as well make it all the traditional way. So we're gonna start off with our flour. Now, if you are gluten-free, you can absolutely use just a gluten-free all-purpose flour. If you're trying to go paleo, you could use an almond flour. I would not use coconut flour just because it's gonna give it a taste that doesn't really mix. So, but a gluten-free flour would be totally fine for this. Now, anytime we make any sort of flour dredging mixture, you wanna season it with salt and pepper. Salt is a flavor enhancer, so if we don't put it in there, it's not gonna have as much flavor. It doesn't make it salty, it just makes it taste more elevated. So we are mixing in some salt and pepper into our flour mixture. Now you need about 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup. It's not exact because we're just gonna dredge them in there. But 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup should probably be fine. I probably have a little closer to a cup in here because I got a little excited when I was pouring my flour out. Now before we dredge, we're going to want to season our meat as well. Now again, we do this because salt makes things taste more enhanced. So the salt on the pork and in the flour isn't going to make it taste salty, it's going to enhance the flavor of the pork and enhance the flavor of the flour crust. So we just want to take some nice seasoning over our pork. There we go. And you want to make sure you get both sides of the pork seasoned because we don't want one side to taste delicious and the other side to be lacking a little bit. All right, so again, a little bit of salt. And whenever you're working with the raw meat, you want to make sure that you keep it in the fridge until right before you need it. So we just took this out just a minute before we got started. And then you also want to be careful that anything that the raw meat touches, you wash before you use it again, including your hands or utensils. Okay, so we're just gonna take this. Now this is not a batter, this is just a light dusting. So one side, and then you're gonna see just enough to coat, nothing too heavy. We don't want a big thick batter on the edge of this. Now these pork chops, like I said, they're bone out and they're about 1 inch thick. Now, you can make them thicker, you can use the bone in, that would be absolutely fine, but you just need to remember that the thicker the piece of meat, the longer it's going to take to cook, and if you have the bone in, it's gonna make it even longer to cook. So these cooking times are not gonna be applicable for really thick pork chops or bone-in pork chops. Same thing, if you get a really, really thin piece of pork, then you're gonna really cook it a lot less. So just keep in mind when you're making this at home. Okay. There we go. All right, so pork chops are over here. in the sink because now they are contaminated. And we are going to get started on frying these pork chops, and then we'll come back and get ready, all of our things ready for the sauce, okay? All right, so for our frying, we are going to use 2 tablespoons of butter as well as a few tablespoons of olive oil. Now that may seem like an awkward combination, but what it does is the butter gives it that really great delicious taste, and then the olive oil allows the butter not to burn and yet allows the pork to have a really nice crunchy crust on it. So if you're frying anything, pan frying anything like this, it's a really good idea to use a butter and an olive oil together. Now if you are dairy free, you could use coconut oil, but it just doesn't work as well because if the sauce gets too cold, it'll solidify. I would recommend using some of the butter replacements. There's a brand called Melt that I really like, and you can use it just the same as butter. You want to be careful, you don't want to use a ton of Crisco, but for something like this, you really want to stick to a butter or something similar to butter that's going to have a similar flavor and texture to it in the sauce. Okay, so while this is heating up, same thing as when we made our chicken thighs. We wanted to heat up enough so that when we put the pork chops in there, there's going to be a really nice sizzle. So while this is heating up, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Marsala sauce and what makes it Marsala sauce. So Marsala sauce is from Sicily traditionally, and what makes it Marsala sauce is Marsala wine. Now, Marsala wine is made with grapes that can only be found in Sicily. So we're going to use a nice Marsala wine to make this, and I know I give you guys a lot of substitutions, but in reality, the best thing that you're going to do is use that Marsala wine because otherwise it won't be a Marsala sauce. Some people will replace Marsala with sherry or a Madeira wine, but then you're going to have a sherry sauce or a Madeira wine sauce. You're not going to have the typical taste of a Marsala sauce that you're looking for. And like I said, what makes the Marsala so special is that it's made with grapes from Sicily, and it's also fortified with brandy, so it has this really dark, earthy oak flavor to it, and that's what makes the Marsala wine so different. All right, so it looks like we are cooking up here. Whenever you're pan frying with butter, you want to make sure that you don't brown the butter first, unless that's what we're going for. But since we're just using this as our pan frying liquid, we don't want to let this butter get too brown and cooked off. All right, so we're just going to take our pork chops and we're going to lay them in. There we go. We have a nice little sizzle going. Nice. Good. All right. So these guys are going to cook for about, excuse me, cameraman. These guys are going to cook for about 4 minutes on each side. You want to make sure that you give enough time to cook pretty well through. You want to give it an opportunity for the crust to get a nice, beautiful golden brown. But we don't want to overcook them because what we're going to do is we're going to cook these on one side, flip them over, and then put them aside to rest while we make the sauce. And while they're resting, it's going to cook the rest of the way through. Okay, so we are going to set our timer for 4 minutes because, like I said, sometimes I lose track of time in the kitchen. All right, so that should go off for us in about 4 minutes, and we're going to come over here and get ready to make the sauce. Okay, so one of the components, like I said, for Marsala sauce is our Marsala wine, very importantly. Now, this does break my rule, never cook with a wine you wouldn't drink, but that's just because I don't like to drink Marsala wine. It's very sweet. You only get a little bit of it. So really, this will do. You can actually find this in your grocery store in the oil and vinegar section. You'll have Marsala wine. Sometimes they have sherry in there. They even have some white and red cooking wines. I don't like to use those so much. However, the Marsala and the sherry are really great to get from the food store. Okay, so the other component for our Marsala sauce is going to be mushrooms. Now, I like just a traditional white cremini mushroom, and we're going to need about 1 pound of them. If you aren't a fan of mushrooms, this sauce just isn't for you. Really, it's got a really earthy taste to it. And if you're gonna make a mushroom-based sauce, let's put all the mushrooms in there. And remember, mushrooms have a lot of water content to them, so although this seems like a ton of mushrooms, they're gonna cook down pretty low. So I left a couple to chop to show you guys how I like to chop them, because I wanna just let you know, I like to chop them in this very traditional slice, so that when you're pouring the sauce over the pork chops, you get these nice pieces of mushroom so that you know it's a mushroom. You absolutely could cube it or cut it in any other way, but I just think it gives the dish a really beautiful look. And remember, we eat with our eyes as well as with our stomachs. There we go. So for my vegetarians out there, if you wanted to put this sauce over a big, delicious portobello mushroom, that would actually be awesome. Like a mushroom sauce on top of mushroom. I think that would be pretty darn delicious. You could also do it over any type of replacement meat that you like. Again, this is the sauce. The pork and the chicken, those are just the vehicles to eat the sauce with, and you can put anything you want with it. As for your mushroom choice, you could do a lot of different kinds of mushrooms, but traditionally these white creminis are what we're using, and I just like to stick with the traditional kind because I think it just works well with the sauce. All right, so then we're also going to need, making a lot of noise over there, just gotta check on it. We're also gonna use some garlic because it is a traditional Italian sauce, and what is an Italian sauce without some garlic in it, right? Let me get my garbage bowl. So as always with our garlic, we're just gonna make sure we get all that papery skin off. We don't want that in our delicious sauce. There we go. Okay. So a little fun fact about Marsala sauce is that it's really even though we think of it as an Italian dish, it's actually really a combination of a French and Italian dish. At the time that Marsala became popular, there was a very large French influence in Sicily. So it's actually a combination, and when you go to Italy, it's become such an Italian-American dish that there's really not a lot of places that serve Marsala. So it's just a really great example of how our cultures really kind of take over a food and make it our own. And Marsala definitely has become a very Americanized Italian dish with some French roots to it. So that's why it has such great flavor to it. All right. Another minute on those guys. Okay, next we're going to use a shallot. No, I did not remember to buy shallots. My mom actually bought them for me. So thank you, Mom, for helping me because I have a brain block on buying shallots at the food store. So shallots just have a really nice, beautiful, sweet flavor to them. They're like little mini onions. So as I've said in the past, if you don't have shallots, you absolutely can just replace them with an onion. All right, let's go check on those pork chops. I think they are about ready to be flipped. There we go. All right, they are looking good. Ooh, we got a really good crust on these guys. So we're just gonna flip them over and I'm gonna let them cook for about another 4 minutes. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're letting those guys cook for another 4 minutes and we're coming back over and finishing our sauce. So like I was saying, shallots, you can replace them with onions, but they're not gonna have, onions don't have the same depth of flavor. Onions are very much one note, where shallots have a deeper note to them because of their sweetness. So when you cut a shallot, because they're so small and we're going to cut them into such fine pieces, I like to cut off the stem and the root edge. And we just take the papery skin off, just like you would with an onion or a piece of garlic. There we go. Now, I normally use just 1 shallot for this recipe. However, because these shallots are really small, we're going to make it 2. So you want to have about a 1/4 cup of shallots. And like I said, we're going to cut these really nice and thin. We're not going to chop them into cubes. We're going to have these nice little slices. best you can. They don't have to be paper thin. If you have a mandolin and you'd rather use that, feel free. But just these nice little slices are going to be just fine. Like I think we have almost everything. So we're also going to use a little bit more butter, and although we started with butter, the butter at the end is going to be a nice finishing to bring the whole sauce together. Sorry, those shallots were really strong and now my eyes are tearing. All right, so let's get moving. We'll take everything over to the... Oh man, sorry guys, I made a mistake. I confused my garbage bowl with my serving bowl. That's okay. We're just going to separate them and be good to go. All right. No harm, no foul. We're good. So we're going to take our shallots, our garlic, our Marsala wine, our butter, and our mushrooms all over to this side of the kitchen. Okay. So these guys are looking really great. What we're going to do is we're going to take them and put them in a nice shallow dish, so that they can rest while we are making the sauce. And like I said, it's a very, very similar technique to what we used when we made those Tuscan chicken thighs. So we're going to cover these up to keep them warm, but we don't want them to keep cooking. So just a nice light cover. Good to go. All right. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a little bit of the garlic and shallot mixture. Cook those guys up. We want these to get really nice and caramelized, just like we do when we start any sauce. There we go. All right, so our seasoning is actually going to be dried thyme. Now, dried thyme just goes really well with mushrooms. Again, it's that earthy flavor, has a little bit of sweetness to go well with the Marsala wine. It's going to be great. So as these guys start cooking up, we want to make sure we get all these little bits off of the pan as we can. Now, the wine's going to help deglaze it, so we don't have to really go too crazy getting these all separated and off the bottom of the pan, but it's just good to get them mixing up as we can. All right, so other than the components that we already talked about, we're also going to use chicken stock. Now, like I said, when you're cooking with beef, you want to use beef stock. When you're cooking with veggies, you want to use veggie stock. If you're using fish, you want to use a fish stock. But pork doesn't really have its own stock, and very often we'll use chicken stock with it because chicken stock has a little bit more mild of a flavor, and if you were to pour in beef stock with this, it would just make it taste really beefy as opposed to enhancing the pork flavor. So we are going to put in our teaspoon of thyme. We're going to mix it up just so that it's got a nice little, everything gets incorporated. And we are going to add in about 3/4 of a cup of our Marsala wine. There we go. It's going to bubble up. So like we said last time, when you're using any sort of alcohol, you want to let it bubble up and cook out. If you don't, it's just going to taste really boozy, which is okay if you're making, you know, say a rum cake, but it's not okay if we're making a nice savory dish. Okay. We're letting that cook out. We're also going to put in 3/4 of a cup of our chicken stock. If you don't have chicken stock, you can use veggie stock instead. Like I said, stay away from the beef stock. It's just not going to mix as well. And we're going to let this come up and come to a boil. And as it's boiling, as it's cooking off, you're just going to take your nice wooden spoon and get all of these nice pieces off the bottom. It's going to really help flavor your dish. Okay. Next, we're going to add in our mushrooms. Now, I know what you're thinking is that all of that alcohol probably did not cook off yet from our Marsala wine. You're right, it didn't. But as we cook down these mushrooms, it's going to just continue to cook off. So it's going to cook down a little bit. We don't have to wait to add the next ingredients in. We can just let it cook off as we cook the other ingredients in. All right, so now that we've added these mushrooms, I like to add a little bit more salt and pepper. Again, that salt's a nice flavor enhancer, and we want it to taste nice and mushroomy and marsala-y. So we're gonna add in about 1/2 to 1/4 teaspoon of both salt and pepper. All right, so mushrooms, we want them to cook down. We don't want them to be like completely decimated, but we want them to cook down so that when we eat the pork and we put the sauce on top of it, the pork is the texture and the mushrooms are the flavor. Okay, these are going to take a minute to cook down, and while we're doing that, I'm going to show you, talk to you a little bit about our side dish today. So you can eat pork marsala with anything. You can have it with pasta, with egg noodles. You could just put a really nice piece of crusty bread next to it. You want to have some mashed potatoes. You can do all these really great things. But my all-time favorite side dish is polenta. Now, if you have never had polenta, first of all, you are missing out. But second of all, I'll give you a little info about it. Polenta is yellow corn grits. And it's very similar to grits that you would have in the South, like you would have with shrimp and grits, or you would have grits for breakfast, except for the fact that it's a yellow corn grit, while our Southern grits are usually a white corn grit, more like a hominy. And you can get polenta corn grits in all different types of sizes. You can have a really fine ground grain, or you could have a chunkier grain. The one that we use today is a little bit chunkier because I just like more rustic cooking, and I like to have those chunks of corn in there. So on our back burner over here is our polenta. So I pre-cooked it, and when you cook polenta, it's kind of like cooking a cross between risotto and your rice. So it's going to need a lot of liquid, and it's going to absorb it. So this bad boy probably absorbed a lot of liquid, so we are going to heat them up again. But when you cook polenta, what you do is you put all your aromatics in, your garlic, your onion, and you caramelize them really, really well. And you let them cook down. You add in your liquid, which can be any kind of stock, and a little bit of water. And as you cook it in, you have to stir it and cook it constantly for about 10 to 15 minutes, which is why I didn't do it on here for you guys, because I didn't think you wanted to stare at me while I cooked corn grits for 15 minutes. So that's all you have to do. Your aromatics, your liquids, and then add in your polenta, stir for about 15 minutes. At the end, once these guys heat up, I'm going to show you, we're going to finish with a little bit of milk, a little bit of butter, and some nice salt and pepper, and it's going to be this really delicious, creamy side that we could put right underneath this pork marsala. All right, these are cooking down nice and well. Betty decided to join us today, so I guess maybe we'll give her a treat. You want to sit for us? Sit. No, you don't want to sit? Oh, thank you. She's a good girl. Okay, so this is looking beautiful. These mushrooms are really cooked down well. So we're going to take our 3 tablespoons of butter, and we're just going to pop them right on in there and let it mix around. At this point, we can make sure we bring this down to a low. Alright, now this butter, what it's going to do is make the sauce a little creamier, help thicken it just a little bit. I don't particularly like to add any cornstarch or any thickeners to the marsala sauce. I think that the sauce on its own is delicious, and I like that little bit of liquidy component to it, so that whatever you're eating it with, you can kind of sop it up with. But if you would like to, you absolutely could make this with a little bit of cornstarch to thicken it up. I think it's great just the way that it is. All right, so these guys are looking pretty good. Okay, so our next step is to take our pork chops, nestle them back in, let them cook for just a couple of minutes while we finish our polenta, and then we're ready to serve. Okay. So we take this pork, we're just gonna nestle it in, and once we get them in there, I like to take a spoon and really make sure they're covered in that sauce. Pretty good. Now this can be on low, and we just want the pork to kind of hang in here and absorb some of the flavors of the sauce with the Marsala wine and really kind of get comfy. So we're gonna let this sit on low, and we're gonna come over and we're gonna focus on our polenta. So like I said, for the polenta, this has already been cooking for about 15 minutes. It absorbed all the water, and at the end we're going to add a finishing liquid. Now you could just finish it with some more water or more stock, but at the end we want to take this opportunity to really bring out the flavors that we're looking for. So we are going to take maybe about a half a cup of milk. As always, I'm using rice milk, but you can use any kind of milk or cream that your little heart desires. And we're just gonna mix this in. There we go. And you'll see as soon as you add the water or liquid or milk into it, it's gonna start looking really creamy. Now these have been sitting, so I may have to add a little bit more liquid in. But if you're just doing it at the end, like say you make these all together, you stirred it and you just wanna take it off the pot and eat it, then you probably only need about a half a cup of liquid. There we go, okay. Next, we are going to add in about 4 to 5 tablespoons of butter. Now this is that melt butter that I was talking about, that vegan butter replacement. And it's great because it looks like butter, it tastes like butter, but there's no dairy in it. So if you are having any issues with dairy with your digestion, or if you just avoid animal products, it's a wonderful substitution for these types of recipes where that butter finish is really important to get the creaminess to it. Now, of course, we're going to salt and pepper like we do everything. If you are watching your sodium intake, you don't have to put as much salt and pepper and everything, but still, even just a pinch is really going to enhance the flavors of your food. Last but not least, we are going to do some Parmesan cheese. Any good Italian polenta is going to end with a really great Parmesan cheese. This is a nice dairy-free one. You know, if you eat regular Parmesan cheese, throw regular Parmesan in there. And we're gonna do about a quarter of a cup. If you really like cheese, maybe you're my dad and you put like a pound of cheese on everything, you can put a pound of cheese in there. It'll be totally fine. But a nice quarter cup is be just enough to make this taste the way that we want it to. All right, just make sure you mix it up really well. We don't want any pockets of butter in there, or maybe you do, but you want that all to yourself. So you want to know where they are. All righty, so everything is looking delicious, looking like it's ready to go. These pork chops look fantastic. So right now what we're gonna do is we are going to put together our plate. What I like to do is put a little bit of polenta on the bottom, put a pork chop over it, and put my favorite vegetable on the side. So while you guys were not watching, I actually made some air fryer fried Brussels sprouts because they're like my new obsession since I got my air fryer. So we're gonna put those on the side. All right, so forgetting my own rules. Okay, we are going to go polenta on the bottom. Now polenta, although it is not super solid, it still will hold its form. So nice little plop on the bottom. Then we're going to take one of our really delicious pork chops, place it right on top. And what is the point of making this delicious sauce if you don't put a little extra sauce on there? There we go. Nice. And then we're gonna come over and put our favorite little vegetable on this side. A nice, beautiful air-fried Brussels sprouts. There we go. And we have this beautiful meal. I hope you guys give this a try. You know, these big, bold, flavorful restaurant sauces are not that hard. You absolutely can do them. You just need to be prepared with the right ingredients and take your time and follow the steps. So again, if you guys have any questions, you know how to reach me. Send me a message on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I'm always here for you. And next week, I'm really excited. We are going to be making my most famous dish tater tot casserole, and we're gonna do a whole little brunch edition. So I hope you guys can join me. Have a wonderful day, stay healthy, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks so much.